Hey Oncers, it's Minx here, and it's time for another Once Upon a Time review. This time it's going to be episode 7, and we're going to get right into it. If you have not seen episode 7, which at this point in the week you probably should, um, go ahead and watch that now before you actually watch this, because there are spoilers ahead. With that said, let's get into it. This time we didn't have a lot of parallel stories. We didn't have really anything going on in Storybrooke until about the end. It was almost entirely in the Enchanted Forest, which is actually pretty nice. We still got kind of a parallel feel, but more so in a flashbacky kind of way. Um, we get to learn a lot more about Merlin and get some insight onto him and his motivations, as well as getting to see his relationship with Nimue, which I have to say, did call earlier reviews. Um, we got to see how he actually supposedly got his magic, which was an interesting touch. It wasn't something that I actually foresaw, because let's face it, a lot of times Once Upon a Time is somewhat predictable. Now, needless to say, that does not detract from its enjoyableness, to be able to watch it. It's just sometimes you're like, I totally saw that coming. This one I did not. Turns out he was like on the run. It looked like back in Roman times almost, based on his shoe style with the uh, those lace-up sandals. Um, he looked like he had ropes around his wrists, so I'm wondering if he wasn't him and the other dude were a slave, perhaps. And they're going through the desert, end up finding the Holy Grail. The other guy gets into dust. And next thing you know, here's Merlin drinking from the cup after, giving thanks to the gods. And somehow that's how he ends up getting magicked. I was a little iffy on that scene. It was kind of a cool twist. I liked what they were attempting to do with it. I think some of the execution was a little bit off. Like, assuming that all of a sudden he's got magic just because, grass sprouted. It could have just been a trick from the gods. Um, to be like, ha, you made it to the oasis. You are, worthy of this oasis, kind of a thing. So that was a little weak, but I liked their spin on that. I also did not see coming that he actually made Excalibur. He forged Excalibur from smelting down the Holy Grail. That was a cool touch. It was a very good twist on the typical story about, Nimue, aka the Lady of the Lake, originally having the sword. One thing it does bum me out about that is that means that because the sword is legitimately actually the Holy Grail, um, we're never going to get to see Galahad questing for the Holy Grail along with some of his Knights of the Round Table buddies. So that kind of saddens me a little bit. I was hoping they would pull that in, along with a couple of other things that are missing from Arthurian legend. Um, so that's kind of depressing. But all in all, it was actually a really cool twist, and I can get on board with that. Um, Another thing is we got to see the romance between Nimue and Merlin, which was good. That is kind of in many versions of Arthurian legend, that they were romantically linked. It was kind of cliche how she ends up becoming the Dark One, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed seeing the fact that her need for revenge and vengeance overpowered her love for Merlin, and that's how she ended up going to the dark side. Um, so that was cool. The fact I liked the touch where Merlin was explaining to Emma because she's like, "Oh, she's the one in the mask," and he goes, "Yes, it's easier to mask what easier to cover up what you're doing if you can put it behind a mask," which I thought was a good touch. I felt like that was a good, meaningful line. It is not our line of the episode, but I'll get to that in a minute. I actually enjoyed watching Emma struggle with her inner need to be good and the temptation of being bad. I liked that. I feel like it was more visible and palpable. Her performance really actually came through for the most part in this episode. A couple issues I have is I feel like when she was grafting that last spark of Prometheus's fire to reunite the pieces of the sword, I feel like that was a little bit of overacting, you know. I feel like when Merlin was originally smelting down the Holy Grail into the sword, I feel like that was almost more graceful. And I get that Emma is a little bit, you know, still new and growing into her powers, but I feel like that could have been done a lot more gracefully. Um, so that was, I guess that was him showing a practiced hand, but it still was slightly overacting for me. It was cool to get to see how many people are currently living inside of Emma's head, and a little frightening because she needs some medication for that shit. Um, so that was kind of cool. One of the things that I didn't like was when Nimue became the first Dark One, um, how quickly she was suddenly covered in the traditional Dark One glitter, which I still don't understand why they are covered in glitter. That's just, I mean, I get that glitter is craft herpes because it gets everywhere, but that was an interesting choice. I didn't really like how quickly it overtook her body on one kill. Typically, you would think it would take a little bit over time. I mean, I could see like maybe her eyes changing or her body going a little more gray, like the color slowly just like draining out. But it just seemed like too much too fast. There's going to be plenty more for her to do Dark One status to get the full effect. I mean, even Rumpel didn't immediately change. Emma still isn't immediately changed, and I don't know if that's just a simple reflection of the fact that she's, not fully, you know, hasn't fully completely embraced her darkness, or if it's taking that long. So yeah, I feel like that was a little bit of a nitpick, but eh. Um, Zelina, I knew that Beezy was dirty, and she'll get hers in the end. Um, I feel like she suckered Mary Margaret in way too easy. If Mary Margaret was acting as Snow, I think she would have just kicked her in the face and been like, "Suck it up, Buttercup." Um, I feel like she's a lot harder and a lot more hardcore when she's actually Snow than she is when she's actually Mary Margaret. She's kind of a sucker. So I didn't really care for that part too much. I did actually really like the twist of them binding Merlin to the sword half, so that he can be controlled that way. Which sucks for him, but I thought that was a really cool twist, and it actually brings to mind a very interesting question. When is he still connected to the hilt part of Excalibur? And if he is, when it's melded together with the dagger, what implications does that have? In a way, that would bring him joined to the Dark One, which in a way is also partially his love interest in Nimue, the original Dark One. Does that somehow interact? That's what I want to know. If not, how did he get removed from being tied to that part of the sword, and couldn't he use that same magic to remove Emma from the dagger? Like, these are questions, and I hope they don't turn out to be massive plot holes, because then I will be really upset. Other things that are upsetting me. We still haven't seen any mention of other people from Arthurian legend, like Galahad, like I already said. Also, Morgana slash Morgan Le Fay, because she was a huge part of Arthurian legend. There's also Mordred, also a huge part, no matter which variation you get. We haven't seen any of them, but the thing that pisses me off the most so far, where the hell is my Mulan? We were promised that Mulan would return this season, and she hasn't shown up yet. I feel like there's a huge missed opportunity that they could have had with having Mulan there. I mean, she's a warrior. She's a warrior chick. She could totally just be fighting up there with all of the knights. She already proved she can hold her own when she was questing with Philip and then helping to protect Aurora. She's a badass. Why isn't she in there yet? And especially because they've already said that she will be there and that she will explore her own relationships, which includes it being an LGBT relationship. Oh, rainbows. Um, which is awesome because they're finally, getting more into the diversity of, real world stuff. Some people will have a problem with that because apparently a lot of people thought she was in love with Philip. And to me, that means you did not actually see the episode where she was approaching Aurora, and it was pretty damn clear that she was, in love with Aurora. So, whatever. Water under the bridge. I'm hoping they bring her in soon because I want my Mulan because she is a badass and I love having badass chicks on this show. With that said, next week is a 2 hour special, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm hoping there's great one-liners in there too. We had actually two decent lines that were in contention for line of the episode. Ultimately, I'm going to give it to Regina. No bias there. Because there was a scene where Zelina is like, you know, because she's listening to their plan of how they're going to break in. And Regina's like, well, if you're going to create a scene, you might as well create some noise. And, takes the silencing spell off of her. Classic Regina. And also, it was actually tied with an Emma quote, which was actually Emma when she's questing with Merlin, and he's like, yeah, it's up there, it's just right up there. And she's like, that's a lot of up. Um, so I think those two were probably the best lines of the episode. Um, I would give the episode on a whole at least a B plus, probably closer to an A minus. They got into some really in-depth stuff. We didn't have to deal with a whole lot of, parallel story where we're jumping completely back and forth. It actually flowed very nice. We got some good emotional stuff. There wasn't a whole lot of CG to really bring it down at all. There was a few overacting moments and a couple of nitpicks that I think knock it firmly out of the firm A range. I could give it a bottom level A. So not too bad. The one-liners were kind of weak this episode, which is another reason I took it down. Some of the dialogue, it was a very serious episode, so the seriousness of the dialogue overtook the humor. Um, so I'm looking forward to that 2 hour special. I don't know if they're actually going to tie everything in because I do know that for the 100th episode, which I think is this Sunday, um, everyone's coming back. Like a bunch of people from the past, Peter Pan, Cora, a whole bunch of people are returning, including Cruella de Vil, who's dead. So I don't know how they're gonna, interconnect this, or if it's just gonna be its own set aside story. Either way, it'll be cool. Afterwards, sometime that week, we're actually going to do a Once Upon a Time podcast with me and a couple of my friends who are also fellow oncers. And so be looking forward to that. That will be up on YouTube once we're done with that. So with that said, later, oncers.